One telescope, one discovery, and a universe that shouldn't exist this way. The James Webb Space Telescope looked back to the earliest moments of the cosmos and found galaxies, black holes, and structures forming far too early to be possible. Today we uncover how these discoveries challenge everything we thought we knew about the origin of the universe. Because this isn't just new data, it's a direct contradiction of modern cosmology. Now let's begin. There is a galaxy sitting in the data collected by the James Webb Space Telescope that contains roughly 200 billion stars. That by itself is not unusual. The Milky Way contains somewhere between 100 and 400 billion stars depending on how precisely it is measured. So a galaxy of comparable scale is entirely expected. The universe is filled with galaxies of that size. They are not rare, they are not surprising. What is surprising, what crosses the threshold from surprising into genuinely disturbing, is when that galaxy existed. This galaxy, along with several others like it, was fully assembled, fully populated, with hundreds of billions of stars and already operating as a mature gravitational system when the universe was approximately 400 million years. Old. Not 4 billion, not 400 million decades, 400 million years. The universe today is 13.8 billion years old. That means this galaxy reached the scale of the modern Milky Way when the cosmos was barely 3% of its current age. To put that in terms that the human brain can actually process, imagine a newborn infant, 3 days old, still in the hospital unable to lift its own head, who is simultaneously driving a car, speaking 4 languages with native fluency, and managing the operations of a multinational corporation with offices on 5 continents. That is not an exaggeration for dramatic effect. That is proportionally the exact level of developmental impossibility that this galaxy represents. The universe at 400 million years old was by every established measure of cosmology an infant. And yet there, it was fully grown, fully structured, already ancient in all the ways that matter. The discovery did not come from a single anomalous data point that could be dismissed as instrument error or statistical noise. It came from multiple independent research teams analysing multiple deep field images from Webb's first operational year, finding not 1 or 2, but 6 candidate galaxies of comparable mass, all of them existing in the same impossibly early era, all of them defying the same set of theoretical expectations. The scientific community's first response was the appropriate one: assume the measurements are wrong. Check the calibration, look for gravitational lensing, account for dust. Examine every possible source of distortion that might be inflating the apparent mass. Every correction was applied, and when the dust, literal and figurative, had settled, the galaxies were still there. Smaller than the most extreme initial estimates, yes, but still present. Still massive. Still far too large for the time in which they existed. To understand why this matters so profoundly, it is necessary to understand what modern cosmology actually says about how galaxies form and why the process has a strict, non-negotiable timeline. The universe does not build galaxies the way a factory assembles a product from pre-made parts. It builds them the way a city grows from a campsite, slowly, sequentially, with each stage dependent on the completion of the previous one. After the Big Bang, the universe was an almost perfectly uniform sea of hydrogen and helium gas, with tiny density variations, fluctuations so small they would be invisible to any instrument less sensitive than the detectors used to map the Ben. Cosmic microwave background. Gravity patient and relentless began working on those fluctuations. Dense regions attracted more matter. Matter accumulated. But the process was not fast, because the universe in its early stages was also hot and expanding. And hot expanding gas resists compression. Before any stars could form, the gas had to cool. Before it could cool, the universe had to expand enough for temperatures to drop to the right range. Before stars of a second generation, the kind that produce heavier elements, could exist, a first generation had to live and die. Each step imposed a minimum time requirement. None of them could be skipped. This is not a model built from pessimism or conservatism. It is built from the observed physics of how matter behaves under the conditions that existed in the early universe. And according to that physics, a galaxy containing hundreds of billions of stars should require somewhere between 1 and 2 billion years to assemble at minimum. 400 million years is not a tight schedule. It is not an ambitious target. It is, by the established rules of structure formation, simply not enough time for the required steps to occur in sequence. And yet the galaxy exists. This is where the James Webb Space Telescope enters the story, not as an explorer that travels to distant places, but as something more interesting and more strange. Webb is a passive time machine. It does not go anywhere. It sits at a fixed point in space, 1.5 million kilometers from Earth, hovering in the gravitational balance between the Sun and our planet, and it waits. What it waits for is light, ancient light, photons that departed their sources billions of years ago when the universe was young and nothing in our solar system had yet been born, and have been travelling through expanding space ever since. The key concept here is the relationship between distance and time. Light moves at a fixed speed, approximately 300,000 kilometers per second in a vacuum. This means that when Webb detects light from a galaxy 13 billion light-years away, it is not seeing that galaxy as it exists today. It is seeing it as it existed 13 billion years ago, because that is how long the light took to make the journey. Looking farther into space is without exception looking deeper into the past. The telescope's mirror is not a window into distant space. It is a window into distant time. Every observation Webb makes is in a literal and physical sense. Archaeology recovering evidence of conditions that no longer exist from a universe that no longer looks anything like what Webb is recording. This is what makes the discovery of those early massive galaxies so destabilizing. Webb was not finding theoretical predictions confirmed or refuted. It was recovering direct physical evidence, actual photons that had been travelling for over 13 billion years. That the universe in its earliest stages contained structures that the standard model of cosmology says could not have been there yet. The evidence is not a simulation. It is not an extrapolation. It is light arriving at the mirror carrying information about a reality that contradicts the textbooks. The central problem then is not simply that a few galaxies were surprisingly large. The central problem is that this forces a question with no comfortable answer. If the early universe was already this mature, this organized, this structurally complex, where exactly does the story we have been telling about cosmic origins break down? Is the timeline wrong? Are the models of star formation rate incomplete? Is there a mechanism of structure formation operating in the early universe that has since become inactive, leaving no trace in the galaxies we study nearby? Or is there something more fundamental, some assumption so deeply embedded in the standard model that questioning it feels almost category violating that needs to be revised? Science does not dissolve under this kind of pressure, it sharpens. The question is not whether the standard model survives intact. The question is what replaces the pieces that do not fit, and how far the reconstruction needs to go. If a skyscraper appeared on a construction site after only 3 days of foundation work, would that prove the foundation was laid incorrectly? Or would it prove that someone was building from a set of blueprints that no one had ever seen before? But those impossible galaxies are only the first layer of the problem. Hidden inside them is something far more terrifying. Something that even physics itself has no satisfying explanation for. Black holes are not the villains of the universe in any dramatic sense. They do not hunt, they do not pursue. They simply sit and wait, and the mathematics of gravity does the rest. Anything that crosses a certain threshold of proximity will follow a path that ends in one direction only. In the grand architecture of the cosmos, supermassive black holes are more like structural features than predators. Enormous concentrations of mass at the centres of galaxies, so gravitationally dominant that they shape the rotation of every star orbiting around them, millions of light years away. The reason they become the central problem of this story is not because of what they do, it is because of when they exist. A supermassive black hole is not simply a large version of the stellar mass black holes produced when massive stars collapse. The difference is not one of degree, it is one of kind. When a star between roughly 20 and 100 times the mass of the Sun exhausts its nuclear fuel and implodes, it can leave behind a black hole of perhaps 10 to 50 solar masses. These objects are real well documented and regularly detected through the gravitational waves they produce when they collide and merge. They are impressive but comprehensible. A supermassive black hole, by contrast, can mass anywhere from a few million to tens of billions of times the mass of the Sunday. The object at the centre of the Milky Way weighs approximately 4 million solar masses. The one at the centre of the galaxy, Messier 87, the first black hole ever directly imaged in 2019, weighs approximately 6.5 billion solar masses. These are not the same category of object as a stellar remnant. They are something else entirely. And the process by which they grow from a small seed into something millions or billions of times more massive than the Sun requires time, a lot of it. Here is the constraint, and it is not a theoretical preference. It is a physical law. When a black hole consumes surrounding gas and matter, that material does not fall in cleanly. It spirals inward, forming a disk of superheated plasma that generates ferocious radiation that pushes outward directly against the flow of infalling material. The more aggressively the black hole feeds, the harder this radiation pushes back. At a certain feeding rate, the outward pressure of the emitted radiation exactly balances the inward pull of gravity, and no additional matter can fall in. This is the maximum possible accretion rate, and it is named the Eddington limit, after the British astrophysicist Arthur Stanley Eddington, who derived it in the early 20th century. Think of it this way: a black hole eating at its absolute maximum rate is like someone trying to drink a milkshake through a straw while simultaneously blowing air back up the same straw. At some point, the outward pressure prevents anything else from going in, except in this case, the air being blown back is radiation energetic enough to push entire clouds of gas away from the feeding zone. The black hole does not get to simply eat as fast as it wants. Physics has installed a governor, and that governor cannot be switched off. Starting from a seed of perhaps 20 or 30 solar masses, the kind of remnant left by an early massive star, and feeding at the absolute Eddington limit continuously, and without interruption, the mathematics allows the black hole to roughly double its mass every few tens of millions of years. Run that calculation forward and the answer becomes clear. To build a black hole of 1 billion solar masses from a stellar mass seed, even under the most optimistic assumptions, requires somewhere in the range of 800 million to 1 billion years. That is the hard floor. That is the minimum time. Reality, with its interruptions from gas depletion, competing feedback and environmental turbulence, tends to push the number higher, not lower. The James Webb Space Telescope has found supermassive black holes weighing hundreds of millions of solar masses when the universe was less than 500 million years old. Some of the objects Webb detected push this boundary even further. Sources of intensely energetic light in an era less than 200 million years after the Big Bang, at a time when the standard model suggests the first stars had barely had time to finish forming, let alone die, leave behind black hole seeds, and allow those seeds to grow into anything approaching the supermassive scale. The reaction from the astrophysics community was in its own way entirely understandable. When data contradicts a well-established model, the first obligation of science is not to revise the model, it is to check the data. And the checking was thorough. Were the mass estimates inflated by the brightness of actively accreting material, making the black holes appear more massive than they were? In some cases, yes, that correction was applied and helped. Was there gravitational lensing amplifying the signal from some of these sources, possibly in specific instances? Were the instruments miscalibrated in some systematic way that could explain the discrepancy across hundreds of independent observations? No evidence of that was found. When every available correction had been applied, and every reasonable source of error had been exhausted, the black holes remained. Smaller than the most extreme initial estimates in some cases, but still present, still impossibly massive for their era. Still sitting at the centres of those impossibly massive early galaxies like a contradiction stacked on top of a contradiction. The humour of the situation, and there is humour in it if one is willing to find it, is that the scientific response to data, this anomalous, essentially begins with the equivalent of checking whether the telescope is plugged in correctly. Not because scientists are dismissive, but because the alternative, accepting that the data is correct and the model is fundamentally incomplete, carries implications large enough that every other possibility deserves to be ruled out first, carefully and completely. The telescope was not plugged in wrong, the instruments were not inverted, the data was real. This forces the question open. If black holes cannot grow this fast by conventional accretion from a small stellar seed, then either they are not starting from small seeds, or they are growing by mechanisms that the standard model does not account for. Neither of those options is comfortable, because both require the early universe to have operated in ways that current physics does not predict. The leading candidates for what might have happened involve scenarios that existed on the speculative fringe of astrophysics before Webb's observations ideas that were theoretically permissible but observationally unsupported. Direct collapse. The possibility that instead of building up from a small stellar remnant, some black holes formed from the gravitational collapse of an enormous primordial gas cloud in a single catastrophic event, creating a seed of 10,000 to 100,000 solar masses without any intermediate stellar phase. Runaway, merging in the dense, compact early universe where objects were far closer together and collision rates were far higher. Black holes may have grown primarily by colliding and merging with each other rather than by consuming gas, building mass at rates that bypass the Eddington ceiling entirely. Each of these was a hypothesis before. Webb has made them necessities, not confirmed them, but made it clear that something in this category must be true, because the alternative is accepting that the black holes simply should not exist, and they demonstrably do. If something exists, physically observationally, undeniably exists, but cannot exist according to every established law of physics currently known, does that mean the laws are wrong? Or does it mean there are laws we have not yet discovered? Answer may lie in stars that were never given a name, strange entities from the very dawn of time, whose evidence of existence we are only now beginning to uncover. Every star visible in the night sky tonight, every single point of light that has ever been named, catalogued, painted into mythology, or navigated by, is in the language of stellar astronomy, a second-generation citizen of the present universe. Or a third, or a fourth. The Sun itself is estimated to be a third-generation star, meaning that the atoms in its core were forged inside at least two previous stellar bodies that lived, burned and died before our solar system had any raw material to work with. Every heavy element that makes up the Earth, every carbon atom in every living cell, every iron atom in human blood, all of it was manufactured inside stars that no longer exist, scattered into space by their deaths, and recycled into the next generation of formation. This means there was a generation before all of that, a true first generation. Stars that formed from a universe that had produced nothing heavier than hydrogen and helium, because no previous star had yet existed to forge anything else. These are called population 3 stars, and they represent one of the most consequential and least understood chapters in the entire history of the cosmos. The name sounds clinical, the reality is extraordinary. To understand what made population 3 stars so radically different from anything that exists today, consider what modern stars are built from. When a cloud of interstellar gas collapses to form a new star in the present-day universe, that gas is not pure. It contains hydrogen and helium in abundance, yes, but it also contains trace amounts of carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, iron, silicon, and dozens of other elements produced by generations of previous stellar activity. These heavier elements, which astronomers collectively call metals regardless of their chemical classification, play a specific and critical role in the star formation process. They allow gas clouds to cool. Cooling matters because hot gas resists compression. When a gas cloud begins to collapse under its own gravity, the compression heats it up, and that heat pushes back against further collapse. The heavier elements, particularly carbon and oxygen, are extremely efficient at radiating this heat away, allowing the cloud to continue cooling, continue compressing, and eventually fragment into many smaller clumps, each of which becomes a separate, relatively modest star. This is why stars in the modern universe tend to form in clusters of thousands, most of them falling within a mass range of a fraction to a few tens of times the mass of the Sunday. Population 3 stars had none of those cooling agents. Their gas was pristine, the original hydrogen and helium, produced in the Big Bang's first few minutes with no contamination from any prior stellar generation, because no prior stellar generation had yet existed. Without efficient cooling, the collapsing gas cloud could not fragment effectively. It could not shed its heat fast enough to break into smaller pieces. Instead, the entire mass, or a far greater fraction of it, continued collapsing as a single unit, feeding into one or a handful of objects rather than dispersing into thousands. Think of it this way. If modern stars are skyscrapers built from a full catalogue of construction materials, steel, glass, concrete, composite polymers, prefabricated panels, then Population 3 stars were the first shelters ever built by the PATH. First humans to arrive in a new land using only 2 materials available in that environment. Except those shelters, because of the unique properties of those 2 materials under the specific conditions of that primordial landscape, ended up being not humble huts, but structures larger than any building ever constructed since. The simplicity of the ingredients produced something far more massive than the complexity of everything that came after. Current theoretical models, and it is important to emphasize that these remain models because no Population 3 star has ever been directly observed, suggest that individual stars from this first generation may have reached masses of several hundred to perhaps 1,000 times the mass of the Sunday. Some estimates push higher. These were not stars in any sense that the word evokes from everyday familiarity. They were nuclear furnaces of almost incomprehensible scale, burning through their fuel at rates that made their lifespans absurdly short by stellar standards. A star like the Sun will burn for approximately 10 billion years total. A Population 3 star of several hundred solar masses would exhaust its fuel in perhaps 2 to 3 million years. A cosmological eye blink, less than 0.1% of the Sun's lifespan. And then came the question of how they died. For a star in the modern universe of intermediate mass, death means a gradual shedding of outer layers, a collapse of the core into a dense stellar remnant, and a supernova explosion that distributes the star's heavy elements back into the surrounding gas seeds for the next generation of formation. For Population 3 stars, some theoretical models suggest the ending was categorically different. Stars above a certain mass threshold may have undergone what is called a direct collapse. The entire stellar body, unable to produce a successful outward explosion due to the extreme conditions in the core, simply falls inward. No scattered debris, no enriched gas cloud distributed across light years of space. Just an implosion. The entire mass of a 5 to 100 or 1,000 solar mass star, converting directly into a black hole of comparable size without releasing the material back into the universe. This is not a minor distinction. It is the potential resolution to the problem described in the previous part of this story. If Population 3 stars routinely produced black hole seeds of several hundred solar masses, rather than the 10 or 20 solar mass remnants left by modern massive stars, the starting point for supermassive black hole growth changes dramatically. The Eddington limit still applies. The ceiling on feeding rate is the same regardless of the seed's initial mass. But the time required to reach 1 billion solar masses from a seed of 500 solar masses is vastly shorter than from a seed of 20. The mathematics that seem to make early supermassive black holes impossible begins under these conditions to become merely extremely difficult. And extremely difficult is a category that the universe evidently has no problem operating within. This makes Population 3 stars one of the most urgently sought targets in all of modern astronomy. The problem is that they are extraordinarily difficult to observe directly. Their era, the first few 100 million years of cosmic history, corresponds to redshifts so extreme that their light has been stretched far into the infrared, requiring instruments of Webb's sensitivity even to approach the right, observational window. And because they formed before the universe had produced the chemical complexity needed to create dust, they left behind different spectral signatures than any star observed in the modern universe, meaning that identifying them requires both reaching far enough back in time and knowing exactly what to look for. Webb has not yet directly confirmed the observation of a Population 3 star, but is approaching the redshift range where such detections become theoretically possible, and several of the anomalous light sources detected in the earliest cosmic epochs, intensely energetic, unusually blue, present at times when the standard model suggests almost nothing should be shining, are consistent with what an extremely massive, extremely hot first-generation star would produce. These are not confirmations, they are traces, fingerprints on a surface rather than a photograph of the hand that made them, but they are the closest humanity has ever come to seeing the light of the universe's very first fires. If the first generation of stars that ever existed has never been seen directly, is it possible to reconstruct the full history of the universe only from what they left behind? But those solitary giants did not act alone. The early universe was not a still portrait, it was an unrelenting collision, a chaos of forces operating at scales and speeds that have no equivalent in the calm, well-ordered cosmos we inhabit today. And the true measure of that chaos has only just been taken for the first time. There is a city that should not exist. Not a literal city, the universe does not build cities. But if one were to take the data that the James Webb Space Telescope has returned about certain galaxies in the early universe and translate it into something a human being could walk through and understand intuitively, the result would feel exactly like arriving in a city that was built 5 years ago, only to find that every building is already showing decades of wear. Every resident is elderly, the streets are quiet, the schools are empty, and nobody, not one person, has had a child in years. The infrastructure is complete, the architecture is mature, and the entire place has, for reasons no one can fully explain, simply stopped growing. These are called Quenched galaxies, and their presence in the early universe is one of the strangest things the Webb telescope has found. To appreciate why quenching the cessation of star formation is so disorienting when found in a young galaxy in a young universe, it helps to understand what quenching actually requires. A galaxy does not stop forming stars because it decides to. It stops because the conditions necessary for star formation have been eliminated, and creating those conditions, then eliminating them, demands that the galaxy first complete an entire biological cycle of stellar life. Gas must compress into stars. Those stars must ignite, burn through their nuclear fuel, and die in explosions that enrich the surrounding medium with heavy elements. That enriched gas must cycle back into the galaxy's reservoir. Multiple generations of this process must occur, gradually consuming the available raw material before the well truly runs dry. This is not a quick process. In the modern universe, large galaxies that have undergone quenching typically show stellar populations, spanning billions of years of star formation history, evidence of a long, active past, followed by a gradual or sudden shutdown. Finding a quenched galaxy in a universe less than 1 billion years old is by this logic roughly equivalent to finding a retired marathon runner who completed their last race at age 6. The timeline does not permit the career, and yet Webb found them. Not one or two enough to represent a pattern, a systematic feature of the early universe rather than a statistical anomaly. Galaxies that had already burned through their star-forming gas, already aged past their productive phase, already gone quiet, at a time when the universe itself was barely out of its first chapter of existence. The question of mechanism, of what actually shuts a galaxy down, leads directly back to the objects described earlier in this story. Because the leading explanation for rapid quenching in massive early galaxies is not gas depletion through natural consumption. It is something more violent and more immediate. It is the supermassive black hole at the galaxy's center. When a supermassive black hole enters an active feeding phase, consuming surrounding material at high rates and radiating ferociously, it does not merely shine, it pushes. The radiation and high-energy particle winds it generates streaming outward in every direction from the central accretion zone can exert pressure on the galaxy's interstellar gas sufficient to physically expel it. Not gradually drain it, not slowly consume it, expel it. Launch it out of the galaxy's gravitational potential, entirely sending the raw material of future star formation streaming out into intergalactic space where it cannot be recovered. A galaxy stripped of its gas in this way does not slow down gradually, it stops. The supermassive black hole in this scenario functions less like a drain and more like a pressure valve that has been opened too wide, a release so forceful that it empties the reservoir faster than any natural consumption rate could. Explain. The loop this creates is one of the more unsettling features of the early universe as Webb has revealed it. A supermassive black hole grows to extraordinary mass in an impossibly short time by mechanisms that are still being debated. In doing so, it enters periods of intense activity that drive powerful outflows throughout the host galaxy. Those outflows strip the galaxy of its star-forming gas. Star formation ceases. The galaxy, which may have been assembling stars at a furious rate just tens of millions of years prior, goes silent. And it remains silent, a fossil of a galaxy structurally intact but no longer alive in any productive sense, while the universe around it continues to evolve for billions more years. What makes this loop particularly striking is its speed. In the modern universe, the relationship between black hole growth and galaxy quenching plays out over timescales of hundreds of millions to billions of years, a slow feedback cycle that shapes galactic evolution gradually. In the early universe, according to Webb's observations, the same cycle appears to have completed in a fraction of that time. The black hole grew fast, the outflows came fast, the galaxy shut down fast, and what remained was a structure that looked, in terms of its stellar population and gas content, far older than the age of the universe at the time of observation could possibly justify. There is an irony embedded in this that the universe seems entirely indifferent to. The supermassive black hole at a galaxy's centre is, in a meaningful sense, a product of the galaxy itself. It grew from material that the galaxy provided, fed by gas, that the galaxy funneled toward its core, and yet once it reached a sufficient mass and activity level, it became the mechanism of the galaxy's termination, creator and destroyer occupying the same position at the centre of the same structure. The galaxy built the thing that ended it, and it did so in a time frame so compressed that the entire arc formation growth quenching was complete before most of the stars currently visible in the night sky had been born. This pattern of processes that should require billions of years completing themselves in hundreds of millions runs through every layer of what Webb has found in the early universe. It is not an isolated quirk of black hole physics or an anomaly specific to star formation rates. It is a systemic feature. The early universe operated on a schedule that the standard model of cosmology did not predict and cannot yet fully explain. Whether the explanation involves physics that is genuinely new, or physics that is known but has been applied under conditions never previously considered, remains one of the most active and unresolved questions in the field. If the very thing that builds a galaxy is also the thing that destroys it, is a supermassive black hole, an architect or an executioner. But those individual galaxies, each one a compressed tragedy of rapid birth and premature death, are not the most troubling discovery Webb has delivered. What truly unsettles the scientific community is the realization emerging from observation after observation that these galaxies were never isolated. They were connected, woven together into structures of staggering scale and organization at a time when theory insists such structures had no right to exist yet. There is a structure in the universe so vast that calling it a structure feels inadequate. It has no edges that have been fully traced, no boundaries that have been measured end to end, no single vantage point from which its entirety could be observed even in principle. It is not a galaxy. It is not a cluster of galaxies. It is the architecture upon which galaxies themselves are arranged, the largest coherent pattern that exists in the observable universe, woven from dark matter and ordinary gas across distances that make the word large functionally meaningless. It is called the cosmic web, and unlike the galaxies, the black holes and the quenched stellar systems described in the preceding parts of this story, the cosmic web is not a collection of objects. It is a relationship. It is the expression written across billions of light years of space of how gravity has organized all matter since the beginning of time. To picture it without mathematics, consider what Earth looks like from orbit at night. The continents are dark except where human civilization has concentrated, and those concentrations glow. Cities appear as bright nodes connected to one another by thinner lines of light, tracing highways and rail corridors, the infrastructure that links population centers across the landscape. Between the nodes and the connectors there is darkness. Not emptiness, the land is there, but a meaningful absence of the activity that defines the lit regions. The pattern is immediately recognizable, bright points connecting filaments, intervening voids. The cosmic web looks identical, except that each glowing node is not a city but a galaxy cluster, containing hundreds or thousands of individual galaxies, each containing hundreds of billions of stars. Each connecting filament is not a highway, but a strand of dark matter and gas stretching for hundreds of millions of light years, funneling matter toward the nodes at its intersections. And each dark void between the filaments is not empty farmland, but a region of space spanning hundreds of millions of light years, in which almost nothing, no galaxy, no cluster, no meaningful concentration of matter exists. The web is the universe's own infrastructure. It is the road system that matter has been travelling since gravity first went to work on the primordial density fluctuations left over from the Big Bang. The prediction of the cosmic web's existence was one of the genuine triumphs of 20th century cosmology. Computer simulations running models of gravitational collapse and dark matter accumulation over billions of simulated years consistently produced the same result: a filamentary network, a web-like distribution of matter, separated by enormous voids. When large-scale galaxy surveys in the 1980s and 90s began mapping the actual distribution of galaxies across hundreds of millions of light-years, the match between simulation and observation was striking. The cosmic web was real, it was there, and its existence confirmed that the models of large-scale structure formation were, at least in broad outline, correct. Those models, however, came with a timeline. The cosmic web was not supposed to appear fully formed. It was supposed to grow slowly, incrementally over billions of years of gravitational work. In the earliest epochs of the universe, the distribution of matter was expected to be nearly smooth, with the filamentary structure only gradually becoming pronounced. As dark matter halos merged gas flowed along the emerging scaffolding and gravity patiently carved the uniform primordial sea into the intricate network visible today. According to the most detailed simulations available, a well-developed cosmic web with clearly defined filaments, populated nodes, and pronounced voids should require several billion years to reach recognizable maturity. The James Webb Space Telescope found it already mature when the universe was only a few 100 million years old. The observations came in multiple forms. Webb detected elongated chains of galaxies, not randomly scattered points of light, but organized linear arrangements stretching across millions of light-years, aligned in the way that galaxies align when they are sitting along a common filament and being funneled toward the same gravitational node. It detected protoclusters, the dense, chaotic precursors to the massive galaxy clusters of the modern universe, already assembling in the early cosmic epochs, already drawing in surrounding material along pathways consistent with filamentary inflow. It detected the large-scale spatial correlations between galaxy positions that are the statistical fingerprint of web-like organization in data, from an era when the standard model predicts those correlations should barely have begun to develop. The closest earthly analogy for the absurdity of this timing involves a birthday party. Imagine ordering a custom cake for a child's first birthday. The baker takes the order, confirms the date, and prepares to deliver it. When the cake arrives and the candles are lit, the child is 30 years old, wearing a suit, discussing property investment with colleagues, and mildly irritated by the interruption. The cake was ordered for an infant. It was delivered to a fully functioning adult. Something happened between the order and the delivery that the baker's timeline simply did not account for, and nobody can quite explain what. That is the situation with the cosmic web. The universe placed an order for a filamentary large-scale structure to be delivered after several billion years of gravitational processing. Webb looked back to the delivery window and found the structure already there, already organized, already doing the work it was supposed to spend billions of years becoming capable of doing. The implications reach deeper than the web itself. The cosmic web is not assembled by ordinary matter acting alone. Ordinary baryonic matter, the hydrogen and helium gas that forms stars and galaxies, does not have enough gravitational self-interaction to spontaneously organize into a structure of this scale and coherence on any reasonable free timescale. The scaffolding is built by dark matter first. Dark matter, which interacts gravitationally but not electromagnetically, can accumulate and cluster without the electromagnetic pressure that slows the compression of ordinary gas. It forms halos. Those halos connect into filaments. Those filaments create the channels along which ordinary gas subsequently flows, cools, and eventually forms the luminous structures, the galaxies and clusters that astronomers can actually observe. If the cosmic web was already well developed when the universe was only a few 100 million years old, the inescapable conclusion is that dark matter completed its organizational work, the formation of halos, the connection of filaments, the establishment of the gravitational scaffolding, on a timeline significantly faster than current models predict. Not slightly faster, significantly faster. Fast enough that the entire subsequent cascade of galaxy formation, cluster assembly, and large-scale structure development was already well underway, at an epoch when the standard model suggests the foundation was barely being laid. Why dark matter would have organized this efficiently in the early universe is a question that current physics cannot answer with confidence. The properties of dark matter, its mass, its interaction cross-section with itself, the details of how it clusters under different temperature and density conditions are not fully known because dark matter has never been detected in any laboratory experiment. Everything known about it comes from its gravitational effects on visible matter. And if those gravitational effects in the early universe produced a cosmic web faster than models predict, it suggests that either the models of dark matter behavior are incomplete, or the conditions of the early universe created dynamics that the models have not yet captured correctly. Neither conclusion is comfortable. Both are scientifically necessary to confront. Step back from the individual discoveries, the impossible galaxies, the premature black holes, the stars that burned before the sun existed, the galaxies that aged before the universe was old enough to justify it, the cosmic web that appeared, before gravity had time to weave it and a single pattern, emerges with uncomfortable clarity. This is not a collection of independent anomalies. This is not a handful of measurements that need better calibration or a few theoretical predictions that need minor revision at the margins. Every direction Webb points, every epoch it probes, every class of object it resolves, in the early universe returns the same verdict. The universe built more, faster, and more completely organized than the equations allow. It is not one detail that is wrong. It is not one measurement that is off. It is the entire picture telling a story that modern physics did not write and cannot yet fully read. If the map of the universe that 50 years of cosmology carefully drew turns out to be nothing more than a rough preliminary sketch, what is hiding in the blank regions that no one has filled in yet? To understand why the universe diverged so dramatically from everything the models predicted, it is necessary to go back to the most fundamental starting point of all, back to the first moments after the Big Bang itself, and look carefully at what was actually happening in that darkness before the first light ever appeared, before the first star ignited, before the first atom of hydrogen fell into the first gravitational well deep enough to compress it toward nuclear fusion, before any photon of visible light had ever travelled more than a short distance through the universe without being immediately absorbed. There was a period of absolute, total, unbroken darkness that lasted for somewhere between 150 and 200 million years. This era has a name. Cosmologists call it the Cosmic Dark Ages. It began approximately 380,000 years after the Big Bang, when the universe had cooled enough for electrons and protons to combine into neutral hydrogen atoms for the first time. A moment called recombination, when the dense fog of charged plasma that had filled all of space finally cleared, releasing the radiation that we now detect as the cosmic microwave background. That clearing was in one sense the universe becoming transparent. But transparent to what? There were no stars, there were no galaxies, there were no sources of light of any kind. The universe became see-through at the precise moment when there was nothing to see. What followed was silence and darkness, on a scale that has no earthly equivalent and no human frame of reference adequate to contain it. Imagine a room, not a small room, not a large room, but a room the size of everything, with no windows, no doors, no electrical wiring, no bioluminescence, no radioactive glow, no reflected starlight, no ambient anything, just gas. Neutral hydrogen and helium spread across the entirety of space cooling, gradually drifting in near-perfect uniformity. Nothing happening that any instrument sensitive only to light could detect. And yet, and this is the critical point, something was happening. Something enormous. Something that would determine the entire future structure of the cosmos. It was just happening in a medium that emitted no light, produced no signal, and left no trace that any telescope pointed at that era could directly observe. That something was gravity, and its primary agent in the cosmic dark ages was not the ordinary matter that would eventually form stars and galaxies. It was dark matter. Ordinary hydrogen and helium gas in the post-recombination universe was for the purposes of gravitational collapse frustratingly well behaved. It was spread nearly uniformly across space, with density variations of only about 1 part in 100,000 fluctuations, so small that on their own, without assistance, they would have required billions of years of gravitational amplification before they could collapse into anything as dense as a star-forming cloud. Ordinary matter was, in the language of physics, coupled to the radiation field, meaning that the pressure of photons moving through the gas kept it from compressing too rapidly. Even after recombination, the gas retained enough thermal pressure to resist rapid collapse. Dark matter had no such constraint. It does not interact with light. It does not feel radiation pressure. It does not couple to the photon field in any way that has been detected or measured. During the entire preceding era, the hundreds of thousands of years when the universe was a hot, opaque plasma in which ordinary matter was constantly buffeted and smoothed out by the relentless pressure of radiation, dark matter was already quietly doing what gravity told it to do, accumulating. Density variations in the dark matter distribution were growing, while corresponding variations in the ordinary matter were being held flat by radiation pressure. By the time recombination occurred and the universe went dark, dark matter had a significant head start. The standard picture of what happened next involves dark matter continuing to accumulate into halos, roughly spherical concentrations of invisible mass that deepened gradually into gravitational wells, deep enough for ordinary gas to eventually fall into them. The gas falls in, compresses, cools, and eventually reaches the densities and temperatures required for nuclear fusion to begin. Stars form, light appears, the dark ages end. This process in the standard model is gradual. The halos grow by accretion and merger over hundreds of millions of years. The first stars appear at the very end of the dark ages, after the infrastructure has been sufficiently developed to support them. What the most recent generation of simulations, including several published in the period between 2024 and 2025, has begun to suggest, is more unsettling than this orderly picture implies. These simulations, incorporating more detailed treatments of dark matter self-interaction and the specific density fluctuation spectrum inherited from the Big Bang, indicate that dark matter may not have simply formed isolated halos during the dark ages. It may have begun organizing into filamentary structures the early threads of what would become the cosmic web significantly earlier than previous models predicted, not after hundreds of millions of years of halo growth and merger, during the dark ages themselves, in the dark before any light existed to illuminate what was being built. The significance of this is architectural rather than merely chronological. If dark matter was already threading itself into a filamentary network during the dark ages, then, when the first gas clouds began to cool and collapse at the end of that era, they were not falling into a smooth, uniformly distributed, gravitational landscape. They were falling into a pre-structured environment, a three-dimensional scaffolding of dark matter filaments and nodes that had been assembled in complete darkness before the construction of any luminous object had begun. The gas did not have to find its own way to density. The channels were already there. The intersections were already marked. The gravitational invitation had already been issued. Think of it as the difference between building a city on a flat, featureless plain versus building one on a landscape where someone has already installed the roads, the utility conduits, and the foundational grids all in the dark before the first resident arrived. The city in the second case does not grow slowly outward from a single origin point. It populates along the existing infrastructure rapidly simultaneously at multiple nodes, because the framework for rapid development was already in place before development began. This reframes the Webb observations in a way that makes them slightly less miraculous, not less surprising, but slightly less inexplicable. If the cosmic web appeared fully formed in the early universe because the dark matter scaffolding that templates the web was itself fully formed even earlier, then the speed of large-scale structure formation is not a violation of physics. It is a consequence of a construction timeline that began earlier than the standard model assumed in a medium that emitted no light and left no directly observable record of its activity. The phrase "no directly observable record" is the critical one. Everything known about the dark matter scaffolding of the early universe is inferred from the positions of galaxies, from the statistics of large-scale structure, from the fluctuations in the cosmic microwave background. No instrument has ever detected a dark matter filament directly. No observation has ever recorded dark matter doing anything other than exerting gravitational influence on the matter that can be seen. The dark ages, by definition, are inaccessible to any telescope that relies on light because there was no light. What happened in that period of absolute darkness is reconstructed from its consequences, not from its direct evidence. This creates a profound epistemological constraint. The most important formative period in the history of cosmic structure, the era during which the scaffolding for everything that followed was assembled, is permanently hidden behind an observational wall that no telescope, however sensitive, can fully penetrate. Webb can push closer to the end of the dark ages than any previous instrument. It can detect the earliest light sources that ended them, but it cannot see into the darkness itself. It can only read the shadows that the darkness left behind. If most of the foundational work of building the universe was carried out by something we cannot see, cannot measure directly, and cannot observe in the era when it mattered most, can we truly claim to understand how the universe came to be, structured the way it is? But dark matter is not the only variable under suspicion. There is another unknown one that accounts for 68% of everything in the universe that we understand even less. 68% of the universe is made of something that has no agreed-upon physical explanation. He has never been detected directly in any experiment and is currently causing every galaxy outside our local gravitationally bound group to accelerate away from us at an ever-increasing rate. That is not a dramatic framing chosen for effect. That is a factual description of the situation. 68% of the total energy content of the observable universe consists of what is called dark energy, and the most precise scientific answer to the question of what dark energy actually is at a fundamental level remains: we do not know. The discovery of dark energy came in 1998, when two independent teams of astronomers studying distant Type Ia supernovae, stellar explosions of consistent enough brightness to serve as reliable distance markers, found that those supernovae were systematically dimmer than expected. They were farther away than the expansion rate of the universe should have placed them. The only explanation consistent with the data was that the expansion of the universe was not slowing down under gravity as nearly every cosmologist had assumed. It was speeding up. Something was pushing space apart, not pulling matter together, not resisting the expansion but actively accelerating it. That something was named dark energy, and its discovery earned the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2011. To feel intuitively what dark energy does, imagine standing on an enormous rubber sheet, not a small trampoline but a surface stretching in every direction without apparent limit. Now imagine that someone beneath the sheet is pulling it outward from all sides, simultaneously stretching it uniformly, continuously, and at an ever-increasing rate. You do not feel yourself moving. Nothing around you on the sheet moves relative to the sheet itself. But the distance between you and every other object on the sheet grows steadily, inexorably faster with each passing moment, simply because the medium you are all resting on is expanding beneath you. That is, in physical terms, what dark energy is doing to the fabric of space. Not pushing galaxies through space, expanding the space between them. What makes dark energy genuinely strange beyond its existence, which is strange enough, is its behavior as the universe grows. Every other form of energy or matter in the universe becomes less dense as the universe expands. Pour a gas into a larger container and its density drops. The same is true for radiation, for dark matter, for every physical substance that occupies space in the normal sense. Dark energy does not behave this way. Its density, the amount of dark energy per unit volume of space, remains essentially constant as the universe expands. This means that as space grows, the total amount of dark energy in the universe increases. Energy is appearing continuously as the universe gets larger, not being converted from another form, not being released from some reservoir, appearing in apparent violation of the conservation principles that govern every other physical process known to science. Current physics accommodates this through the framework of the cosmological constant, a term originally introduced by Albert Einstein in his field equations, representing an intrinsic energy density of empty space. In this interpretation, dark energy is not a thing that fills space. It is a property of space vacuum energy, the energy of emptiness itself. Every cubic meter of space, simply by existing, contains a fixed amount of this energy. As the universe creates more space through expansion, it creates more vacuum energy. The energy is not coming from nowhere, it is coming from the universe's own geometric growth. This interpretation is mathematically consistent with observations. It explains the accelerating expansion with precision, and it provides absolutely no insight into why the vacuum should have the specific energy density it has, which happens to be approximately 120 orders of magnitude smaller than the value that quantum field theory naively predicts it should be. This discrepancy, a factor of 10, followed by 120 zeros, is considered by many physicists to be the worst quantitative prediction in the history of science. Here then is the precise nature of the mystery. Dark energy is the only thing in the universe about which the following three statements are simultaneously true. Its existence is confirmed beyond any reasonable scientific doubt. Its effects are measured with extraordinary precision, and its fundamental nature is completely unknown. It is by any reasonable definition the perfect mystery known to be real, known to be doing something specific and utterly unexplained at the level of what it actually is. If cosmology were a detective novel, dark energy would be the culprit, whose presence at the scene is definitively established by evidence, whose actions are fully documented, and whose identity remains entirely unknown after decades of investigation. The connection to the problem of early galaxy and structure formation runs through a proposal that several theoretical physicists have advanced in recent years, that dark energy may not have been constant throughout cosmic history. The cosmological constant, as its name implies, treats dark energy as a fixed property of space that does not change with time. But there is no fundamental physical reason why it must be constant. If dark energy is not a static vacuum property, but rather some dynamical field, one whose strength or character varied in the early universe, then the conditions of the early cosmos could have been meaningfully different from what the Standard Model assumes. Some proposals suggest that dark energy may have been stronger in the early universe, potentially affecting the rate at which density fluctuations grew, and therefore the speed at which structure assembled. Others suggest its equation of state. The relationship between its pressure and its energy density may have differed from the value it holds today, with consequences for how gravity competed against expansion in the earliest epochs. None of these proposals has been confirmed. Some are constrained by existing observations. But the detection of large-scale structure far earlier than expected, combined with the presence of galaxies and black holes that grew too fast, according to standard models, has given these ideas renewed attention, because if standard models' timeline is consistently wrong in the same direction, across multiple independent lines of evidence, the most natural place to look for a systemic cause is in the parameters that govern the universe's overall expansion history. And the parameter most poorly understood, most opaque to direct measurement, and most consequential for structure formation timescales is dark energy. If the thing that occupies the largest share of the universe is also the thing humanity understands the least, what does that reveal about the true boundaries of human knowledge? Dark matter, dark energy, these unknowns have lived at the edges of physics for decades, named and catalogued and extensively modelled their existence certain and their nature elusive. But Webb has now added something to that list that no one anticipated. Objects that are not merely poorly understood, but that do not fit into any existing classification at all. The things that cannot be placed in any category that physics had. Prepared a space for, because physics had not imagined that such things could exist. There is a moment in the history of biology that every naturalist recognizes as one of the most disorienting experiences the scientific mind can have. It is the moment when a specimen arrives on the examination table that does not fit. Not an unusual specimen, not a rare variation within a known species. Something that after every available classification framework has been applied, and every comparative reference has been consulted, simply refuses to belong to any existing category. It is not this. It is not that. It is not a known variant of anything. It is something else, and the word else carries in that moment an enormous amount of scientific weight. The James Webb Space Telescope has produced the cosmological equivalent of that moment repeatedly, across hundreds of independent observations, in a class of objects that until Webb began returning data did not appear in any theoretical model, any simulation output, or any observational catalogue in the history of astronomy. They are called with a plainness that belies their strangeness little red dots. The name emerged informally from the observational data, compact sources appearing as tiny, intensely red points of light scattered through the early universe at redshifts corresponding to the first billion years of cosmic history. Their redness in this context is not a property of their intrinsic colour, but of what has happened to their light during its journey across billions of years of expanding space. The light has been stretched red-shifted from shorter to longer wavelengths. Accounting for that stretching and reconstructing what the sources actually looked like when they emitted their light, astronomers found objects that were extraordinarily compact, far brighter than their small sizes should permit, spectrally anomalous in ways that match neither the profile of a normal galaxy nor the profile of a quasar, the intensely luminous cores of galaxies powered by actively feeding supermassive black holes. A normal galaxy of that brightness would be far larger. A quasar of that compactness would show different spectral signatures. The little red dots showed neither. They occupied a space in the observational parameter diagram, brightness versus size versus spectral character, where nothing was supposed to be. In the taxonomy of astronomical objects, the box they belonged in had not been drawn. In biology, when a specimen defies classification, the scientific response is to examine it more carefully, compare it against everything known, and eventually either place it in an existing category that was being applied too narrowly, formally describe it as a new species. The same process is underway with the little red dots, and the leading candidate for what they might be is something that theoretical astrophysics had considered as a speculative curiosity, but never expected to find evidence of in real observational data. An object that has been called tentatively a black hole star. Not a black hole inside a galaxy, not a supermassive black hole surrounded by an accretion disk within a larger stellar system. Something structurally different and considerably stranger, an object in which a massive black hole forms the gravitational core of what is, in effect, an enormously bloated stellar envelope. The black hole sits at the centre. Surrounding it, held in place by the black hole's gravity and inflated by the radiation the black hole generates as it feeds, is a vast diffuse cloud of gas, luminous hot, and puffed outward into a shape resembling a star far larger than any star that forms by conventional means. The black hole is not inside the star in the way that a nucleus is inside a cell. The black hole effectively is the energy source, the engine of the entire structure, with the gas envelope serving as both fuel supply and radiation reprocessing medium. This is not a stable long-term configuration. Theoretical models suggest that a black hole star of this kind would be transitional, a phase through which certain objects passed in the early universe under the extreme density and temperature conditions that existed then before settling, into the more familiar configuration of a supermassive black hole at the centre of a conventional galaxy. If that is correct, then the little red dots are not anomalies in the sense of being broken or wrongly formed. They are snapshots of a stage in cosmic development that was real, was widespread, and was over before the universe was old enough for anything observable in the local modern cosmos to have formed. A phase that left no surviving examples in the nearby universe, no analogue in current observations of conventional objects, and no clear theoretical prediction of its existence until Webb found hundreds of them sitting in the data demanding explanation. The number matters as much as the nature. If Webb had detected 3 or 4 little red dots in its deep field observations, the scientific response would have been cautious acknowledgement of interesting outliers pending further study. The actual count, spanning into the hundreds across the regions Webb has surveyed, removes that interpretive escape route. Hundreds of objects sharing the same anomalous characteristics distributed across the same early cosmic epoch cannot be dismissed as measurement artifacts, gravitational lensing, coincidences, or statistical flukes at the tail end of a known distribution. The probability of that many independent errors all producing the same impossible signature is not small. It is negligible. What hundreds of little red dots represents is a systematic feature of the early universe, not an exception, not an edge case. A population, a category of object that existed in significant numbers during a specific period of cosmic history, that played some role in the evolution of structure during that period, and that current physics has no prepared framework for. Understanding, the box does not exist, and the universe has been filling it with objects for the entirety of its observable early history. The implications reach into the same timeline problems that have appeared throughout this story. If black hole stars represent a real transitional phase, if massive black holes in the early universe went through a period of existing within extended gas envelopes before settling into the configurations we recognize today, then the formation and early growth of supermassive black holes may have proceeded through pathways that bypass the constraints described in the Eddington limit framework. A black hole, embedded in a dense gas envelope, has access to a continuous close-range fuel supply in a geometry that is fundamentally different from a black hole accreting from a disk in open space. The feeding dynamics, the radiation pressure, geometry, the net accretion rate, all of these could differ from the standard model's assumptions in ways that allow faster growth without requiring physics that violates known principles. This does not resolve the mystery, it relocates it. The question shifts from how did black holes grow so fast to what created the conditions for black hole stars to exist, which pushes the inquiry one step further back into the early universe toward the same period of darkness and rapid, invisible structure assembly that the preceding discussion of the cosmic dark ages pointed toward. When reality keeps producing things that theory has no room for, at what point does the accumulation of exceptions become the signal that the theory itself needs to be rebuilt from the ground up? Objects without names, structures that formed too fast, black holes that grew without permission from the laws of physics. All of it converges on a single question. What actually happened in the first 100 million years after the Big Bang? There is a specific kind of disorientation that comes from watching a film whose internal timeline has been quietly violated. The scene is set, the period is established. The visual language of the era, the architecture, the clothing, the technology signals clearly to the audience where in history they are. And then in the background of a single shot, something appears that should not exist yet. A building that belongs to a different century. A technology that postdates the story by decades. It sits there in full view, entirely unexplained, while the narrative continues as though nothing is wrong. That is the experience of examining what the James Webb Space Telescope has found in the era between 100 and 200 million years after the Big Bang. The standard model of cosmology at its most specific treats this period as one of the least eventful in cosmic history, at least in terms of luminous activity. The cosmic dark ages were ending. The very first stars were, according to the model, just beginning to form in isolated pockets of the universe where conditions happened to favour early collapse. These first stars were expected to be sparse, scattered, and just beginning the long process of reionizing the neutral hydrogen that filled the surrounding intergalactic medium. The universe at 100 million years in the picture that cosmological models paint was barely waking up. A few points of light. Enormous voids. Mostly darkness, with the infrastructure of the first luminous structures still assembling itself from the ground up. Webb has found, at the redshifts corresponding to this era, sources of intense ultraviolet light, not faint hints. Not marginal detections at the edge of instrument sensitivity that could be attributed to noise or calibration uncertainty. Sources of blue, high-energy ultraviolet radiation. The kind of light that is produced specifically and almost exclusively by two things: extremely massive, extremely hot stars, burning at temperatures of tens of thousands of degrees or higher, or the accretion disk surrounding a black hole that is actively consuming matter at high rates. Both of these signatures correspond to objects that, according to the standard model, should barely have had time to form at this epoch, let alone be radiating with enough intensity to register clearly across more than 13 billion years of cosmic expansion. The diagnostic value of ultraviolet light in this context is not incidental. It is specific. When astronomers detect infrared radiation from the distant universe, which is what Webb primarily observes because ultraviolet and visible light from the early cosmos has been redshifted into the infrared by cosmic expansion, the original wavelength of that radiation, reconstructed by accounting for the redshift tells them what kind of physical process produced it. Thermal radiation from cooler, older stellar populations peaks at longer wavelengths. Radiation from the energetic processes associated with massive young stars or active black hole accretion peaks at short ultraviolet wavelengths. Finding reconstructed ultraviolet sources at redshifts corresponding to 100 to 200 million years of cosmic age is not ambiguous. It is a direct observational signal that something very energetic was operating in that era. Here is the irony that the universe seems entirely comfortable with the era that the standard model describes as nearly featureless, a quiet interlude between the uniform darkness of the recombination epoch and the gradual brightening of early star formation has turned out to be based on Webb's Observations 1 of activity significant enough to leave a clear photometric signature across the full breadth of cosmic history. The models called it boring, the data says otherwise. The universe, as has become a recurring theme in this story, did not read the simulation notes before deciding what to do. The connection to population 3 stars, the first generation of massive metal-free stellar objects described earlier, is direct and scientifically significant. The ultraviolet signature of an extremely massive hot first-generation star would look after accounting for redshift and distance precisely like what Webb is detecting in the earliest observable epochs. These detections are not confirmations of population 3 stars. They are more carefully stated, consistent with what population 3 stars would produce, which, given that every other detection method has so far failed to directly capture them, makes these ultraviolet signals the closest thing to a fingerprint that has yet been identified. If the interpretation holds under further scrutiny, and it is important to note that it remains preliminary pending spectroscopic follow-up observations that will require even deeper integration times than Webb has thus far devoted to. These targets, the implications extend well beyond, adding a new data point to stellar astronomy. The detection of population, 3 stellar signatures at 100 to 200 million years, would mean that the first generation of stars formed earlier than current models predict were luminous enough to be detectable across 13 billion light-years of cosmic expansion, and began the process of reionizing the intergalactic medium and seeding the universe with the first heavy elements on a schedule that compresses the already tight timeline of early cosmic development even further. It would mean that the gap between the end of the Dark Ages and the appearance of significant luminous activity was shorter than the standard model indicates. Perhaps much shorter. The darkness ended, and the universe did not ease gradually into light. It apparently blazed immediately with the full intensity of stellar objects more massive than anything that has existed since. This reframes the entire picture of early cosmic history. The blank space in the timeline between recombination and the first confirmed galaxy detections was not blank because nothing was happening. It was blank because the tools needed to see what was happening did not exist until Webb. The page was not empty. It was written in a language extreme ultraviolet radiation shifted into the infrared by cosmic expansion that required a specific instrument operating at a specific sensitivity to translate. That page is now being read for the first time, and what it says is that the universe's first 100 million years were not a slow, tentative prelude. They were based on every signal Webb has recovered from that era, a period of intense structured energetic activity that the standard model placed in a later epoch, because no previous observation had ever reached far enough back to find evidence of it here. If the first 100 million years of the universe were the most consequential and least understood period in all of cosmic history, does that mean the cosmological models currently in use are being built on a foundation that was never properly examined? And if the foundation was never properly examined, then the question is no longer where the model is wrong, it is what will replace it and how close we are to finding that answer. There are boundaries in the universe that have nothing to do with walls, edges, or physical barriers of any kind. No membrane separates one region from another. No signpost marks the transition. No instrument could detect the crossing. And yet the boundary is absolute, more absolute in a meaningful sense than any physical wall ever constructed. Because a wall can, in principle, be demolished, circumvented, or made transparent by sufficient technology or ingenuity. This boundary cannot. It is enforced not by matter or energy but by the geometry of expanding space itself, and it applies universally, without exception, to every signal, every photon, every piece of information that has ever travelled or ever will travel through the cosmos. This boundary is called the cosmic horizon, and its consequences for what humanity can ever know about the universe are more profound and more permanently limiting than almost any other fact in all of science. The way to understand the cosmic horizon is not through its definition, but through its effect. Right now, at this moment, there are galaxies existing in the universe, real galaxies, with stars forming inside them, with planetary systems orbiting those stars, possibly with civilizations of their own, looking outward and asking their own versions of the questions being explored here, from which no signal no photon, no gravitational wave, no information of any conceivable kind will ever reach the Earth. Not because those galaxies are too far away for light to travel the distance in any practical time frame. Not because the signals are too faint for current instruments, but because the space between those galaxies and Earth is expanding faster than light can cross it, and that condition will never reverse. The light those galaxies emit today is running at the speed of light toward Earth and falling further behind with every moment that passes. It will never arrive. It will never be detected. It will never carry any information about those galaxies to any observer in our region of space, regardless of how long is waited or how sensitive the instruments become. This is the cosmic horizon, not the edge of the universe, but the edge of what is causally connected to us, the boundary beyond which events are occurring right now that are and will forever remain entirely outside the reach of any knowledge we could ever obtain. To feel the weight of this in physical rather than abstract terms, consider a specific mechanical analogy. Imagine running on an escalator that is moving in the opposite direction downward while you run upward. If the escalator moves at exactly your running speed, you stay in place. If it moves faster than your running speed, you move backward regardless of how hard you run. You cannot reach the top. The faster the escalator moves, the more rapidly you fall behind, and no increase in your running speed can overcome it, because the escalator has no upper limit on how fast it can move. This is precisely the situation of a photon emitted by a galaxy beyond the cosmic horizon. The photon travels at the speed of light, the absolute maximum speed at which anything can move through space. But the space it is trying to cross is expanding faster than it can traverse. The photon moves toward Earth at the speed of light and simultaneously falls further from Earth as the intervening space expands. It will run forever and never arrive. It is important to be precise about what is and is not being violated here. No object is moving through space faster than light. The photon itself moves through its local region of space at exactly the speed of light, as required by special relativity. What is expanding is space itself, the metric of the universe, the fabric within which the photon travels. Space is not a thing that moves through space. It is the stage on which motion occurs, and it can expand at any rate without violating the speed limit that governs objects moving across it. A galaxy beyond the cosmic horizon is not travelling away from Earth faster than light. The space between that galaxy and Earth is growing at a rate that means the total distance increases faster than light can compensate for. The distinction is not semantic, it is physical, and it is the reason why the horizon is absolute in a way that no physical barrier could ever be. Now hold that in mind while considering what the James Webb Space Telescope has found within the portion of the universe that is inside the horizon, the observable universe, the region from which light can and does reach us. In that region, Webb has found galaxies that formed impossibly fast black holes that grew without permission from the laws of physics, large-scale structures that assembled before gravity had time to weave them, and objects that fit no existing category in the entire history of astronomical classification. The observable universe, the small, bounded, accessible fraction of everything that exists, has already produced enough anomalies to strain the standard model of cosmology to its mathematical limits. The observable universe has a radius of approximately 46 billion light-years in every direction. This number already confuses people who know that the universe is only 13.8 billion years old, and the reason it is not contradictory is that the galaxies whose light we are receiving were much closer to us when they emitted that light and have been carried far further away by cosmic expansion. During the billions of years the light spent in transit, we are not seeing them where they are, we are seeing them where they were. But here is the dimension of the situation that tends to receive insufficient emphasis. The observable universe, vast as it is almost certainly a small fraction of the total universe. Cosmological models that fit the observed data, particularly the near-perfect uniformity of the cosmic microwave background, strongly suggest that the universe extends far beyond the cosmic horizon. How far is unknown. Some models suggest the total universe is hundreds of times larger than the observable portion. Others allow for the possibility that it is effectively infinite. Either way, the overwhelming majority of what exists lies beyond the horizon in regions that are causally disconnected from us running their own physical evolution in complete separation from anything that happens here. Everything Webb has found in the observable universe, every anomaly, every impossible galaxy, every unclassifiable object, exists in that small, bounded, accessible fraction. The universe beyond the horizon is under no obligation to be any less strange, any less structured, any less filled with phenomena that would revise our understanding of physics. It is by everything the observable universe suggests about the early cosmos almost certainly stranger than what we can see. And we will never know. Not because of technological limitation, because of physics. The one concession that the universe makes to human curiosity in this regard is that the cosmic horizon is not fixed at a single position forever. The horizon is defined by the relationship between the speed of light and the expansion rate of space, and that relationship changes over time. In the early universe, when expansion was slower, the horizon was effectively closer. Less of the universe was causally connected to any given point. As the universe aged and expansion slowed during the matter-dominated era, the horizon grew and regions that were previously causally disconnected became connected. This is why we can see galaxies whose light took 13 billion years to reach us. The horizon expanded over cosmic time to include them. The troubling aspect of the current era is that this growth has stopped. Dark energy's acceleration of cosmic expansion means the horizon is no longer growing in any meaningful way, and the rate of expansion will only increase from here forward. Galaxies that are currently visible but close to the horizon will eventually be carried beyond it as expansion continues to accelerate. Their light, now arriving at our telescopes, will eventually be stretched to wavelengths so long that no instrument can detect them. They will not disappear abruptly. They will fade, their signals redshifting from infrared into microwave into radio waves of vanishing intensity until they cross the threshold of detectability and are simply gone from any possible observation. The humanity of the present era, armed with Webb and its successor instruments, occupies a privileged moment in this process. The horizon is large enough to encompass an enormous portion of the universe's history. The evidence of the Big Bang is still detectable. The cosmic microwave background is still measurable. The distribution of galaxies at multiple epochs is still accessible. We are reading the universe's history at a time when the library is still open, still populated, still preserving its records in forms we can access. We should not take that for granted. The James Webb Space Telescope is not merely a scientific instrument. It is in a very concrete physical sense. Humanity's attempt to read as much as possible before conditions change, to extract from the expanding, cooling, increasingly inaccessible cosmos the maximum possible knowledge of its origin, structure, while the evidence is still recoverable. And even so, even with Webb operating at peak performance, extracting signal from the earliest observable epochs, building the deepest catalogues of early galaxies and large-scale structure ever assembled, we are reading only the visible, portion of a text whose full extent will never be known. We take pride in the fact that Webb can see 13 billion light-years into the past. What receives less attention is that the portion of the universe permanently beyond our view may exceed the observable universe by factors of millions or more. The pride is justified. The humility it should produce is equally justified. We have built the most powerful eye in human history and pointed it at the cosmos and confirmed in the process that the cosmos is vastly, permanently, irreducibly larger than the eye can reach. That is not a failure of the instrument. It is the instrument working well enough to show us the true scale of what we cannot see. If the portion of the universe we can observe is only a vanishingly small fraction of everything that exists, are the cosmic laws we have derived from that fraction truly universal, or are they local rules that happen to hold in our small, accessible corner of a much larger reality? But the observable, the universe is not the only boundary on what humanity can know. There is another limit not written in space but in time, and it grows closer with every year that passes. There is a particular kind of loss that is different from ordinary loss because it is not experienced as loss at all. It happens gradually, incrementally below the threshold of any single generation's perception, and by the time the scale of what has been lost becomes apparent, the capacity to recognize what is missing has also disappeared. This is not an abstract philosophical scenario. It is in the most literal physical sense the future of cosmological knowledge, and the timeline on which it unfolds is written in the mathematics of accelerating cosmic expansion. The universe is not a static archive. It does not preserve its records indefinitely in forms accessible to observers. It is a dynamic system whose expansion continuously alters what information is available to be retrieved, and the direction of that alteration is consistently toward less signal, less accessible evidence, fewer observable sources. A progressively narrower window onto the full history of the power. Cosmos. This narrowing is not fast by any human standard. It operates on timescales that make civilizational history seem like a rounding error. But it is real, it is ongoing, and it is irreversible. Imagine reading a history book, a comprehensive multi-volume account of everything that has ever happened, from the earliest recorded events to the present. Now imagine that the ink the book was printed with is slowly, continuously fading, not evenly, but from the beginning. The earliest chapters grow pale, first their text becoming harder to read, then illegible, then invisible. The process is slow enough that in any given year, any given decade, the change is imperceptible. But over a sufficiently long span of time, those early chapters become unreadable, and eventually the paper itself becomes indistinguishable from blank. In 100 billion years, the history of cosmic origins will look to any observer, with instruments built on the same physical principles as those available today, like a book with most of its pages blank, not because the events did not occur, not because the history was not written, but because the medium in which it was written has been stretched, diluted, and redshifted beyond the reach of any detector that operates on the physics of light. The mechanism is the same one that produced the cosmic horizon accelerating expansion driven by dark energy. As expansion continues and progressively accelerates, the light from distant galaxies is stretched to longer and longer wavelengths. Galaxies that are currently visible to Webb in the near-infrared will have their light redshifted over cosmological timescales, first into the mid-infrared, then into the far-infrared, then into millimeter-wave radio, frequencies of diminishing intensity. The cosmic microwave background, the afterglow of the Big Bang itself, the oldest light in the universe, and the most direct evidence of its earliest state, will be stretched to wavelengths so long and intensities so low that it will be effectively undetectable by any instrument of finite sensitivity. Evidence of the Big Bang will not disappear from the universe. It will disappear from observational accessibility. The specific timescale for this is not a speculation. Based on current measurements of the expansion rate and the properties of dark energy, most estimates suggest that in approximately 100 to 150 billion years, the vast majority of galaxies currently observable will have been carried beyond the cosmic horizon by accelerating expansion. Only the handful of galaxies gravitationally bound to the Milky Way in the local group Andromeda, the Magellanic Clouds, and a few dozen smaller companions will remain within observational reach. Everything else will have faded beyond any conceivable detection threshold. Consider what this means for a civilization that might arise in that era in one of those remaining local group galaxies, and attempts to do what humanity is doing now, look outward and ask where the universe came from. They will look up at a sky containing a small cluster of galaxies surrounded by absolute darkness. They will measure the recession velocities of those nearby galaxies, find them consistent with a small bounded system, and conclude that the universe is what they can see. They will search for evidence of the Big Bang and find nothing because the cosmic microwave background will have been redshifted to wavelengths their instruments cannot reach, and the distant galaxy distribution that tells us about large-scale structure formation will be entirely outside their horizon. They will build a cosmological model based on their observations. That model will be internally consistent, mathematically rigorous, and completely catastrophically wrong about the true scale and history of the universe. And there will be nothing in their accessible data to tell them otherwise. This is not a hypothetical designed to induce existential discomfort. It is a direct physical consequence of the universe's current trajectory, and it carries an immediate implication for the era we inhabit now. Humanity exists at a moment in cosmic history that is by the standards of cosmological timescales extraordinarily well positioned for knowledge acquisition. The universe is old enough to have produced 13 billion years of galaxy formation, stellar evolution, and structural development, all of it still accessible to observation. It is young enough that the evidence of its origin has not yet been erased by expansion. The cosmic microwave background is detectable. The large-scale distribution of galaxies across multiple epochs is mappable. The earliest light from the first luminous objects is just barely with instruments of Webb's capability retrievable. This positioning will not last. Not in the sense that it will end tomorrow, or in a century, or in a million years. Those timescales are negligible relative to the scales on which cosmic expansion operates. But in the language of cosmological time, the window is open now, and the physical processes that will eventually close it are already running. Every billion years from this point forward, some fraction of the currently observable universe will have drifted further toward the horizon. Every billion years, the cosmic microwave background will have been stretched to slightly longer wavelengths. Every billion years, the record of cosmic history that is currently written in the positions and properties of billions of galaxies will be slightly less complete, slightly harder to read, slightly closer to the irreversible condition of the future civilization that will look up and see only darkness. The James Webb Space Telescope is not in this frame, simply a scientific achievement of extraordinary technical sophistication. It is something more urgent than that. It is the most powerful instrument humanity has ever built for reading a record that will not remain readable forever, for extracting information from a universe that is on the grandest timescales in the process of hiding its own history. Every deep field image Webb takes, every spectrum it measures, every redshift it confirms, and every anomaly it records is a piece of history recovered from a source that is slowly becoming inaccessible. Not slowly by human standards, slowly by cosmic ones. But the direction is established and the physics is clear. We are living inside the best possible moment, cosmologically speaking, to understand where the universe came from and how it became what it is. The evidence is still here. The signal has not yet faded beyond reach. The window is still open. But it will not remain open indefinitely, and no future technology, however advanced, can reopen it once it has closed, because what closes it is not a lack of capability, but an irreversible physical process operating at the largest scales of the cosmos. Webb is the sharpest tool humanity has yet developed for working within this window. It will not be the last. But the instruments that follow it, the extremely large ground-based telescopes, and the next generation of space observatories, whatever comes after, will all be doing the same essential thing, reading the book while the pages can still be read. If cosmic knowledge has an expiration date, and humanity happens to be living in the golden era of maximum observational access, does that change how we think about the importance of pursuing that knowledge right now? But the real question is not what will be lost in the distant future. It is what we are doing with what we have right now in this window of time that remains open. Every major instrument in the history of astronomy has done one of two things when pointed at the sky. It has either confirmed what physicists expected to find, adding precision and detail to a picture already broadly sketched by theory, or it has found something that forced the picture to be redrawn. The history of the field can be organized almost entirely around these two categories of outcome. Galileo's telescope confirmed that Jupiter had moons and Venus had phases, both consistent with the Copernican model that planetary motion followed predictable geometry. The discovery of the cosmic microwave background in 1965 confirmed the Big Bang with a precision that silenced the final serious opposition to that framework. The detection of gravitational waves in 2015 confirmed a prediction that Albert Einstein had made a century earlier, doubting toward the end of his life that the signal would ever be measurable. But then there is the other category. Edwin Hubble's observation that the Andromeda Nebula was a separate galaxy, not a cloud within the Milky Way, but an entirely independent stellar system at staggering distance, did not confirm the picture of its time. It shattered it and replaced it with something larger and stranger. The discovery of pulsars, rotating neutron stars emitting precise radio pulses, revealed a class of objects so extreme that the astronomers who first detected the signal informally designated it LGM-1 for little green men, because nothing in the existing theoretical framework could immediately account for what they were seeing. The discovery of dark energy in 1998 fell so far outside expectation that the researchers spent months checking their instruments before accepting that the universe was in fact accelerating its own expansion for reasons that no existing model predicted. The James Webb Space Telescope belongs emphatically to the second category, and the particular texture of its contribution to that category is worth examining carefully because it differs in an important way from previous history rewriting instruments. Previous instruments tended to discover one thing that broke the existing framework, one anomaly, one unexpected phenomenon, one category of object that required new physics to explain. Webb has returned systematically from every direction, It has been pointed with evidence that the existing framework was not wrong in one place, but incomplete across multiple independent domains simultaneously. Galaxies that formed too early, black holes that grew too fast, structures that organized before the physics permitted, objects that fit no existing classification, early energetic activity in an era labeled quiet. Each of these is a separate line of evidence. Each points in the same direction. None of them individually would be sufficient to demand a fundamental revision of cosmological theory. Together they form a pattern whose consistency across independent observational domains is difficult to attribute to coincidence or systematic error. This is the context in which the next generation of observational instruments becomes not merely impressive but urgent. Webb has identified the locations of the problems with extraordinary precision. It has established that the anomalies are real, systematic, and distributed across the early universe in ways that rule out most mundane explanations. What it cannot do in many cases is provide the specific measurements needed to distinguish between competing explanations to determine whether, for instance, the early massive galaxies formed through unusually efficient star formation from conventional gas dynamics, or whether they required some modification to the underlying dark matter model, or whether the conditions of early star formation were simply different from what present-day physics predicts. That task falls to the instruments currently under construction. Consider the extremely large telescope being built on Cerro Armazones in the Atacama Desert of northern Chile, a structure whose primary mirror, at 39 meters in diameter, will be larger than any optical telescope ever constructed. If Webb functions in broad terms like an extraordinarily powerful wide-field camera capable of capturing the faint light of the earliest galaxies across billions of years of cosmic time, then the extremely large telescope functions like a precision analytical instrument that can take that faint light and resolve it into its component wavelengths with a level of detail that Webb cannot match. The difference in function is meaningful. Webb can tell you that a distant galaxy exists and approximately how massive and bright it is. The extremely large telescope can take the light from individual stars within that galaxy, stars whose light has been travelling for over 13 billion years, and read from the specific pattern of absorption lines in that light's spectrum, the precise chemical composition of those stars. This matters because stellar chemistry is a chronometer. A star formed from pristine primordial gas, hydrogen and helium only, with no heavier elements, has a spectrum that looks completely different from a star formed from gas that has been enriched by multiple previous generations of stellar nucleosynthesis. If the extremely large telescope examines the stellar populations of the early massive galaxies Webb has found, and discovers that those stars contain significant abundances of carbon, oxygen, iron, and other heavy elements, it will establish that multiple generations of star formation and stellar death had already occurred before those stars were born, compressing an entire cycle of stellar evolution into the impossibly short time window that those galaxies occupied. That would not merely confirm that the timeline is wrong, it would place hard observational constraints on how wrong it is, and in which direction the revision must go. The Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope takes a different and complementary approach. Where Webb observes small patches of sky with extraordinary depth, and Webb's successor instruments examine individual objects with extraordinary spectral resolution, Roman is designed to survey enormous areas of sky, a field of view approximately 200 times larger than Webb's primary imaging camera, with the sensitivity needed to map the large-scale distribution of galaxies across cosmic time. This is the tool for addressing the large-scale structure questions that Webb has raised. How widespread are the early galaxy overdensities? How does the distribution of matter at high redshift compare to what simulations predict? And what does the spatial clustering of early massive galaxies reveal about the underlying dark matter scaffolding that templated their formation? Think of the relationship between these three instruments in terms that translate their function into something tangible. Webb is a panoramic photographer of extraordinary sensitivity, capturing the full scene with enough detail to identify every person present and roughly how they are dressed. Roman is a census taker with a clipboard systematically covering a territory 200 times larger and counting every individual, recording their approximate location and category, building the statistical picture of the population as a whole The extremely large telescope is a forensic analyst in a laboratory, taking a sample from a single individual and reading from its chemical signature. An entire biography, age, ancestry, history of exposure, evidence of previous relationships. Each instrument answers questions the others cannot. Each is essential for a different reason, and together they represent the most comprehensive observational campaign in the history of cosmology, a coordinated effort to take the anomalies Webb has revealed and determine, with sufficient precision to guide theoretical revision, exactly what kind of new physics or new astrophysics they demand. Here is the irony that every scientist working in this field is fully aware of and openly acknowledges the researchers who designed and built the James Webb Space Telescope expected it to do something different. The expectation, reasonable, well-founded, based on the best theoretical understanding available at the time of design, was that Webb would confirm the standard model of galaxy formation with higher precision than any previous instrument, extending the observational record deeper into cosmic history, and finding in the early universe the faint, fragile, proto-galactic structures that the standard model predicted should be there. The expectation was that Webb would be the instrument that finally showed us the universe's first stumbling steps, small, uncertain, just beginning to find its structural footing. Instead, Webb showed us that the universe had already built cathedrals before the textbooks said the quarry had opened. It found not the confirmation of a model, but the systematic, repeated, multi-domain failure of that model to account for what the early universe actually looked like. Whether this constitutes a success or a failure depends entirely on what one expects from a scientific instrument. If the expectation is that a good telescope confirms existing theory, then Webb has been a peculiar disappointment. If the expectation is that a good telescope shows the universe as it actually is rather than as our models predict it should be, then Webb has been the most successful scientific instrument in a generation. Both framings are defensible. The second is more useful. Science does not advance primarily by confirming what is already known. Confirmation is valuable. It establishes boundaries, increases precision, eliminates alternative hypotheses. But the moments that genuinely transform understanding are the moments when observation outpaces theory, when reality demonstrates that the map was drawn for a territory that does not quite match the landscape. Webb has produced one of those moments, not once, not in a single dramatic discovery, but persistently across every domain of early universe observation, in a pattern whose consistency constitutes one of the strongest arguments in decades, that something genuinely important is missing from the standard picture of cosmic evolution. The price of understanding, it turns out, is the willingness to accept that what you built to confirm your understanding may instead reveal its limits. Webb's builders paid that price, and what they purchased in exchange is a set of questions precise enough, well-defined enough, and observationally constrained enough to guide the next 50 years of cosmological inquiry. When an instrument built to confirm a theory instead continuously breaks, it is that the mark of an exceptional instrument or the exposure of a fragile theory. And there is one final thing, something deeper than everything that has been said. So far, something that no scientific paper writes in its the conclusion section, but that every astronomer feels when they sit with the data Webb returns. There is a photon, a single particle of light that departed a galaxy in the early universe when the cosmos was approximately 400 million years old. At the moment of its departure, the Milky Way did not exist. The Sun had not formed. The Earth was not even a chemical possibility because the heavy elements required to build a rocky planet had not yet been seeded into space in sufficient abundance by the deaths of enough stars. Life was not a distant prospect. It was not a prospect at all. The photon left its source in a universe that contained nothing capable of asking where it came from, and it travelled through expanding space through the formation of the first galaxies and the first clusters through the ignition of the Sun, and the coalescence of the Earth through the entire history of life on this planet through all of human civilization, from its first stone tools to its most sophisticated technology for over 13 billion years. And then it arrived at the gold-coated mirror of the James Webb Space Telescope, was focused by that mirror onto a detector, cooled to within a fraction of absolute zero, and became a data point in a catalogue that a human being will spend a career analysing. That is not a metaphor. That is a description of what actually happens every time Webb observes the early universe. Every photon in every deep field image is a physical object with a 13 billion year travel history carrying information encoded at its source about conditions that no longer exist anywhere in the observable universe. Webb is not measuring distance. It is recovering memory, the universe's own record of what it looked like before anything in our solar system had reason to exist. To feel the full weight of the timescales involved, consider compressing the entire history of the universe into a single calendar year. The Big Bang occurs at the first instant of January 1st. The cosmic dark ages fill the first week absolute darkness. No stars, no light, nothing that any optical instrument could detect. The first stars ignite during that same first week, perhaps around January 4th or 5th. The massive early galaxies that Webb has found, the impossible ones, the ones whose existence strains the standard model, were already fully assembled by approximately January 8th. The Milky Way began forming sometime around March. The Sun ignited on approximately September 9th. The Earth formed shortly after in mid-September. The entire span of the dinosaurs, their rise, their dominance, their extinction, occupies the final days of December. December 30th around midnight, the asteroid that ended the non-avian dinosaurs struck the Yucatan Peninsula. Human civilization, every city ever built, every war ever fought, every scientific discovery ever made, every piece of music ever composed, every word ever written, occupies approximately the final 11 seconds of December 31st. And the anomalous galaxies, the impossible black holes, the unclassifiable objects, the evidence of early cosmic activity that no model predicted, all of it happened in the first week of January in a universe that had not yet decided what it was going to become. Webb is looking at that first week from its position 11 seconds before the end of the year across the full length of the cosmic calendar, and finding that what happened in that first week was far more extraordinary than any model built, from observations made in the last 11 seconds, had the capacity to predict. The distance between where we stand observationally and where the evidence originates is not just a spatial distance. It is a temporal gulf of such magnitude that the entire history of everything humanity has ever experienced, thought, created or destroyed, fits into the negligible rounding error at the end of the timeline. This is what Webb is actually doing, not in the technical language of spectral analysis and photometric redshift measurement, but in the language of what it means. It is reconstructing the universe's earliest memory from fragments of signal that barely survived the journey. It is reading handwriting that was inscribed 13 billion years ago in a medium that has been stretched, diluted and transformed by the expansion of space into something almost unrecognizable, and extracting from that transformed signal a legible account of conditions and structures that nothing in our current theoretical framework adequately anticipated, and the account it has extracted is not discouraging. This is the point that tends to get lost in the language of anomalies and broken models and impossible objects. The findings of Webb are not terrifying. They are not evidence that the universe is beyond comprehension or that science has reached a fundamental wall. They are evidence of the opposite, that reality is richer, more structured, more active, and more surprising than any model built from prior observation could have fully predicted, which means that the next generation of models built to account for what Webb has found will be closer to the truth than anything that came before. Every anomaly is a constraint. Every impossible object is a data point. Every broken prediction is an arrow pointing toward what the revised theory must contain. Consider the galaxy that opened this story, the one with hundreds of billions of stars assembled when the universe was 3% of its current age, existing in apparent violation of every timeline that cosmological theory had established. That galaxy was described at the outset as a number that should not exist. But there is another way to frame it that is equally accurate and considerably more useful. That galaxy is a galaxy that exists by means we have not yet fully understood. Its existence is not a refutation of physics. It is a requirement, a hard observational constraint placed on every future model of galaxy formation, demanding that any successful theory must be capable of producing a galaxy of that mass at that epoch under the conditions of the early universe. The galaxy is not a problem with the universe. It is a problem for our current description of the universe, and problems of that kind are precisely what drive science forward. The standard model of cosmology is not wrong. it is incomplete. It correctly describes the large-scale distribution of matter in the present-day universe with extraordinary precision. It accounts for the cosmic microwave background in detail that no competing framework can match. It successfully predicted the relative abundances of hydrogen, helium, and lithium produced in the Big Bang's first minutes. These are not trivial achievements. They are the foundation on which everything else is built. What Webb has revealed is that the foundation, while sound does not extend as far as it was believed to extend, that the early universe was operating according to a more complete set of rules than the current framework captures, and that, identifying those additional rules is the central task of the Periment. Next era of cosmological inquiry. The universe spent 13 billion years assembling the conditions needed for a species to evolve that was capable of asking where everything came from. It produced, after all of that time and all of that complexity, a creature that could build a mirror 39 meters across and point it at the cosmic horizon that could cool detectors to within a fraction of absolute zero and use them to catch photons that had been travelling since before the sun existed that could take those ancient signals and extract from them a coherent account of the universe's earliest moments. Whether that answer, the answer that Webb and its successors are in the process of constructing, will be worthy of the 13 billion years of cosmic preparation that made the question possible, is something that cannot yet be known. But the question itself is real. The evidence is accumulating. The tools are the best humanity has ever built. And the universe, indifferent as it is to whether it is understood, has at least arranged its physics in a way that makes understanding possible, distributed the evidence across accessible distances, encoded the history in the wavelengths of light, and left enough signal in the data for a species that spent most of its existence trying to survive to now spend some of its time trying to comprehend. If the universe truly operates by laws we have not yet discovered, does that make human existence feel smaller? Or does it make it feel more interesting? Every time Webb turns toward a patch of sky that appears completely dark to the naked eye and finds 800,000 galaxies waiting in that darkness, it is not only looking outward across space, it is looking backward across time. And the next question it is about to answer may be the one that changes everything we thought we knew.